Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the architecture of cognitive efficiency. Or, in simpler terms, why on certain days your brain feels like it just flat out refuses to work. We've all been there, right? You're sitting at your desk, staring blankly at a screen, trying to force yourself to focus, and you just hit this massive mental wall. Well, today, we're going to decode exactly why that happens.
So, is your brain actually lazy? Let's just be real for a second and think about that feeling. It's a completely universal human experience to feel like you've got a lazy brain. You really want to be productive. You want to tackle that huge project, but your brain, it just wants to take a nap instead. It's incredibly frustrating, and honestly, it's so easy to just label ourselves as slackers when this happens. But before you get too hard on yourself, let's look at what the science actually tells us about this whole phenomenon.
Section 1. The Lazy Brain Myth.
Now, there's this widespread belief out there that our brains are just inherently prone to slacking off. And, well, the truth is, yes, in a very specific way, the brain absolutely does take the path of least resistance. But your brain isn't actually slacking. It's not trying to ruin your productivity, and it certainly isn't taking a break just for the fun of it. Instead, it's relentlessly focused on conserving energy. It's constantly trying to save power, and every single thing it does is filtered through this strict lens of resource management.
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 2. The high cost of thinking. To truly understand why your brain operates this way, we have to look at the raw biological data. Just think about your total body weight for a second. Your brain only makes up about 2% of it. 2%! It has a remarkably tiny physical footprint compared to the rest of you. It's really just this small mass sitting up there in your skull. But we have to contrast that tiny physical size with what we're about to learn about its energy consumption.
Because here is the sheer, crazy contrast. Despite being only 2% of your weight, your brain uses a staggering 20% of your body's energy just at rest, even when you aren't doing anything physically demanding at all. Just keeping the lights on in your head requires a massive amount of fuel. To put that into perspective, it's kind of like having a tiny compact car that somehow guzzles a fifth of your gas tank just idling in the driveway. Because energy is so biologically expensive, your brain simply cannot afford to run at maximum capacity all the time. Cognitive energy is an absolute premium resource.
Section 3. Habits, heuristics, and automation.
So if the brain is constantly draining this much power, how on earth does it manage to survive without depleting everything we have? Well, it relies on heuristics. Heuristics are basically the habits, assumptions, and patterns your brain uses instead of analyzing every little thing from scratch. Think of them as mental shortcuts. Or actually scratch that, it's more like your brain's built-in autopilot. They're absolutely brilliant because they drastically reduce the amount of effort required to get through your day. But I do have to caution you, because these are shortcuts, they can sometimes lead to mistakes or cognitive biases. You're basically trading perfect accuracy for vital energy efficiency.
Because of this intense, non-stop need to save energy, the brain strongly prefers familiar routines. Think about it. Learning something brand new or making difficult, complex decisions, that requires a huge surge of extra energy. It forces the brain completely out of its low-power mode. So naturally, your brain is going to favor what's already familiar to you, because the familiar path is the cheap path. It's the path that doesn't threaten your body's precious energy reserves.
To really anchor this concept, just look at some of the things you do every single day. Walking, driving a familiar route to work, brushing your teeth in the morning. If a task can be automated, your brain will absolutely do it. It shifts these repetitive actions into a sort of habitual processing mode. I mean, have you ever driven all the way home and suddenly realized you don't really remember the last 5 miles? That's your brain perfectly executing automation. By shifting those tasks to the background, it frees up your conscious thought, and that's super expensive cognitive energy for much more important tasks that might pop up.
Section 4. The energy-efficient truth. It is time to make a major paradigm shift. We need to drop the word lazy from our vocabulary entirely when we're talking about our brains. Because looking at the reality here, your brain is not a slacker. It is an absolute master of getting the very best results with the least amount of effort. That is not laziness, folks. That is peak efficiency. We're talking about a highly energy-efficient biological reality.
And just to completely bust this laziness myth once and for all, we have to remember that when it is truly necessary, the brain is capable of working incredibly hard. It just strategically saves its power for when it actually matters. During an emergency, or while you're solving a highly complex problem, or when you are actively leaning into learning a new skill, your brain ramps right up. It spends that stored energy exactly when it is most critical. So the crucial takeaway here is summarized perfectly in this quote. This whole energy-conserving trait, it isn't some modern flaw. It is a brilliant adaptation that helped humans survive when food and energy were scarce. Think about our ancient ancestors. They didn't have grocery stores on every corner. Energy was super hard to come by and incredibly easy to lose. A brain that just burned through all its fuel analyzing every single leaf on a tree, it wouldn't have survived. This incredible organ evolved to conserve energy so that we could literally survive in a resource-scarce world. It is an absolute marvel of evolutionary engineering.
So I want to leave you with this. How does this deep evolutionary drive to conserve energy impact the shortcuts you take today? The next time you find yourself defaulting to a habit, making an assumption, or just feeling like your brain absolutely does not want to engage with a hard task, remember this explainer. You aren't lazy. You are operating an ancient, highly tuned, energy-conserving biological machine. The trick here isn't to fight your brain's nature, but to understand it. That way you can choose when to rely on those shortcuts and when to spend that precious energy on the things that truly matter. Thank you so much for joining me today. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you next time.